So far, you've done a lot of straight lead writing, which is just that who, what, when, where, why, and how all together. Now we're going to start to move on to feature leads, which are a different way of opening the story and trying to engage the reader in a way that involves more storytelling. So here's one way to think about how the structure of this kind of story looks. So your lead is kind of that topper, that piece of information, the most intriguing information you can get out there. And then you follow it up with what's called the nut graph. That's where you tell the reader why you're starting to tell them this story, what's important here. And then you follow it up with different sections with all of the facts. So the lead has to be really engaging. If you can wrap it around to the end of your story, that works really well. But we see this a lot in news feature stories, in broadcast stories, in speeches. A lot of ads might use these different types of storytelling leads. So I'm going to show you some examples. There's also a whole PDF with many of these examples and more on the 202 website that you might want to check out. So the first is what's called an anecdotal lead. And here you start with an example or someone in a situation that sets up the rest of the story. So they're kind of you're showing us how this affects certain people, and it illustrates that central theme, which then comes in the nut graph. So this example is one I'll put out there. You can pause it and read it more carefully. But the first 4 paragraphs are the lead. Often this type of lead has a quote in the middle to help reinforce the theme, and then that nut graph is in purple. Okay, so that's an anecdotal lead. A character lead is where you have a particular person who launches the action. So you put the character in a scene, and the story is really about that person and what happened to them. And so we're gonna hear the story through the eyes of this person, so we can introduce to them right away. And so here's a great character lead that sets up our subject of the story, J.D. Steyer. Again, give it a pause and read this one. Then there's a scene setter lead. This is when you want to drop the reader right into the situation with you. You want them to feel like they're in that space. So there's a lot of description and telling us what's happening there that sets the stage for what's to come. Who are the characters in that? It's almost like you're writing a play and you're setting the stage, and now the characters are going to enter and have some action. So here's a good scene setter lead on the top of this Milwaukee Journal Sentinel story. A significant detail lead is one where you pick out one thing and you use that to spark the story, to get it going, and then you expand it out to that nut graph to tell us what the story is really about. So this one starts with a sign in a restaurant and what that means. Then there's a word play lead. This is where you're trying to, play with words a little bit to make the reader kind of chuckle and want to read more about what's happening here. Okay, then an emblem lead is where you use one example to illustrate the larger theme of a story. Maybe it's a person's experience that becomes a way of showcasing the story that you're going to tell. So here we get a story about this boy, Russell Rollins, and then what happens to him. And then don't forget the nut graph. This is the so what of the story. So once you've introduced Russell and his situation, then you have to tell readers why they should care. Here we find out that Russell is part of a bigger trend, and so the nut graph becomes really important for the reader to stay engaged. So you've been introduced to this person. Here's why that's important. So the nut graph is where you can show the scope of the story and really go beyond the lead. So good luck, give it a try, and we're going to do some more feature lead writing in week 4. So this is a chance to get some good practice. So have some fun. Thanks.